Good to go. Alright, so a few years ago, I decided to go on a business trip with my mom. Partly because my mom had to do it for work, and also in her sick sense of humor, she decided that we should spend a day at an animal research lab. Now, partly because I am terrified of monkeys, I was not looking forward to this, but when most people think of animal research, you think of rats getting their eyes pulled out, or monkeys with half their brains running around, so needless to say, I was rather horrified. However, once I got to the research lab and I was able to see the facilities and talk to a lot of the scientists, I learned that there were a lot more benefits to animal research than I was aware of. Which brings me to my major claim, that it's beneficial to use animal testing in medical research. First, because it reduces human suffering, and second, because it makes it easier to create invaluable advances in the medical field. So the first claim I have is that using animals in testing for medical research reduces the human suffering. So if we didn't have animals to use in these tests, then every round of testing would have human involvement. So humans are used in some of the testing. It's not simply animal testing. So according to clinicaltrials.gov, which is basically a government database that keeps track of all the clinical trials in the country, they say that clinical trials are generally considered to be biomedical or health-related research studies in human beings that follow a defined protocol. So basically there are a set of phases, and the medicines need to be tested numerous times before they get to this human testing stage, because before that they're unfinished and they're riskier versions. So having all these other stages before that usually involve the animal testing are explained like this by the same clinical trials website. Today, basic research in many areas of biology and medicine still need to use animals. A good example is the brain. There's still a lot we do not know about how it works, and if we're to find answers to these important questions, fundamental research must continue. Fundamental research is to medicine as the foundations are to a house. If you haven't laid the foundations properly, then the house will either fall down or be impossible to build in the first place. The understanding gained by fundamental research often feeds into the more applied medical research that ultimately leads to new medicines. So if animals weren't used in all these foundational tests, then we'd have humans there for every single round of testing, which could have a lot of negative results. Because even the final stages of clinical trials have negative results. Some of those include, according to the U.S. News Health section, treatments being tested may be worse than those of standard treatment. Side effects may occur that doctors did not anticipate. The new treat may turn out to be no more effective or even less effective than the standard treatment. As with standard treatment, the new treatment may not work for you, even if it works for other patients. Medical care may be more expensive than it would have been if you'd received the standard. The health insurance company may not pay for the clinical trial care. You may have to receive all your tests and treatments at the institution, which would, depending on where you live, require more time and money for travel. So even outside of all these possible risks, humans are allowed to also leave the clinical trial at any time they want, which could dampen the research speed. According to clinical trials, a participant can leave a clinical trial at any time. When withdrawing from the trial, participants should just let the research team know about it and the reasons for leaving the study. So they're welcome to just leave. Another benefit of using animal testing is it makes it easier to allow for invaluable advances in science. So by using animals, it's easier to conduct the experiment more often because there's less regulations to consider. In 2005, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization released a Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights. The foreword to this document gave the purpose of their summit that they held about it in the finished document. In dealing with ethical issues raised by medicine, life sciences, and associated technologies as applied to human beings, the Declaration, as reflected in its title, anchors the principles it endorses in the rules that govern respect for human dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms. By enshrining bioethics in international human rights and by ensuring respect for the life of human beings, the Declaration recognizes the interrelation between ethics and human rights in the specific field of bioethics. So this total document that they published that set the rules out for using humans was 13 pages long and had over 28 articles with rules, including risk assessment costs, the role of government in applying these things, respect for cultural diversity, privacy and confidentiality, consent from all the parties, and what to do if the subject changed their mind mid-test. So this would make any research process long and drawn out. With animals, you don't have the idea of the rabbits suing after the test because they feel it was malpractice. But having less regulations, this can lead to quicker advancements and more positive findings. So according to Dr. Wise Young, a neuroscientist and neurologist at Rutgers University, opponents say there are plenty of people with spinal cord injuries who would happily volunteer for studies. But aside from the ethics of experimenting on humans, there are practical considerations. Right now, it's impossible to tell if a human spinal cord is regenerating. The improvements are too fine-scale for existing imaging technologies. All you can assess are a few indirect outcome measures. To do more, you need to examine the spinal cord itself, which means using models like rats. it's absolutely necessary that we try to minimize the number of animals used. So because of the animal research that we've had over the past 100 years, there have been many advances made, leading to many of the medicines that people now use today. So former scientific advisor to the Research Defense Society in London, Jack H. Budding, discusses some of these medical finds. Just recently, scientists developed a vaccine against Haemophilus influenzae type B, a major cause of meningitis, which before 1993 resulted in death or severe brain damage in more than 800 children each year in the U.S. Early versions of the vaccine produced only poor, short-lived immunity, but a new vaccine, prepared and tested in rabbits and mice, proved to be powerfully immunogenic and is now in routine use. Open-heart surgery, which also saves the lives of an estimated 440,000 people every year in the U.S. alone, is now routine, thanks to 20 years of animal research by scientists such as John Gibbon of Jefferson Medical College in Philadelphia. Replacement heart valves also emerged from years of animal experimentation. So because animal testing reduces the amount of suffering that humans would have from being in testing, it speeds up the research process by making it much simpler, which then allows for more invaluable medical finds. I believe that it's beneficial to use animal testing in medical research.
All right, Alex, you started off very clearly with a nice personal story that adds some credibility to your argument. You set up the issue pretty clearly. We know what your claim is from the beginning. I thought you had an excellent layout of what the two secondary points were that you were going to be talking about. When you got to the first point, you did a very good job citing it. The second point I didn't think was as clearly cited. You basically got into that argument. Again, if people were paying close attention, they'd know that you transitioned to the next point, but I think you could be a little bit more explicit there. Another way that they might be able to tell is that on the first point, you're really dependent on the same source for a variety, most of your evidence on that first point. And it got to be a little bit repetitive. When you got to the second point, there was a lot more diversity in the source citations that you had, and a lot of the evidence was less ephemeral in nature and more concrete, with particular examples or authorities that were giving their inferences along with that particular point. I thought some of the quotes that you had on the first point, they didn't do much besides define what you were talking about. I don't know that you made any inferences from those particular points. You did a good job citing your evidence during the presentation. There were good examples that you presented, and especially in the second part of the speech, a lot of expert testimony, and I thought the factual data was all pretty solid. You could probably use a little bit of statistical information. I don't see big problems here, just like I said, maybe a little more diversity on that first point. And on the presentation issues, it's very solid. You do a good job speaking to the audience, and you come across very confidently. All right. Thank you. Paige, your number has come up. So your page number has come up? You've probably never heard that one before. Sorry.